Okay, welcome to Paint Zoom Tech Shorts. It came up in one of our classes that people might want to know how to stretch paper. And this is especially true if you want to do something like I did last week, which is to paint on a digitally manipulated photograph. This is not only, this has been painted on and then it's been sealed. So in order to do that, you have to treat the paper. This is cardstock. It's regular cardstock. I printed it out on our regular paper. The original comes this, from this, and this. This is the woman walking away, and this is where she's walking to. This is taken in part of my old neighborhood, and this is taken at our old subway stop. This was done in the late 40s. You can tell by the cars over here. And this was done in the 70s. I mashed these two together and stop share and created this photo. And then later I painted on top of the photo. Now I'm doing it again because if you compare these two, you see that this is much brighter. The sides are much brighter. I decided that I wanted a greater contrast in between this street and where she's walking. That I want that really to stand out and be really bright. So I put a gradient over the sides. So now, in order to do this, first we have to stretch the paper. And that's why you see taper on it. We're not going to do this now. This one's gone. We're just working with this. So I usually do this in the bathtub, but I couldn't set up in the bathtub. And you can do it anywhere. Providing that it fits your paper. I tried to do one I tried a square one, didn't work because I didn't have anything large enough to soak the entire thing. So I'm pouring water on. Oh, I didn't show you. This is just to demonstrate that the cardstock is pretty stiff, and that's how the cardstock moved. And we want to know that because we want to know when this is done. Now, so this is soaking, and I would set a timer for about 20 minutes unless I've got all day. It doesn't matter. You can't, I mean, if you leave it in 48 hours, it's going to destroy the paper after a while. But if you did it before you went to bed, you got up in the morning and did the rest of it, it would work. I've done that, especially with big pieces of paper. But this is fine for this. Okay. Now we're going to do the Graham Kerr thing. Chris is going to take this away and not spill it. Okay. So now this, I have another one exactly the same. Well, not exactly the same, but pretty close to the same. That has been soaking for 20 minutes. And why I wanted to demonstrate what the paper was like. That's the unsoaked paper. Now, what you want to test for is that this no longer moves like that. It doesn't rattle, it does splash, but it's more like a piece of fabric than it is like the original cardstock. See, the cardstock is much different. So now we don't need the cardstock. So this is ready because it is like a piece of fabric. And we're going to put it, the first thing we're going to do with it is we're going to put it on a board. So now I'm going to put this on the plywood. And I've made lines. You don't have to make lines. I made lines. And that way I can just fit it in. And then I know I've got enough space for tape all the way around. Now I discovered when I did this one time that see, it's not quite on the line. And I get picky. You don't want to rip the paper because right now the paper is very delicate. What you do want to have is you don't want to have any bubbles. Now I've used a sponge for this. I'm a little nervous when I just do it on paper but I'm a little nervous about wiping the print off the paper. So there we have that. And here we have brown tape, packing tape. And I will show you what clever thing I do when I measure my tape. I measure my tape basically to be another, half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, an inch bigger than the painting. And then I measure one side and then I fold it. And then I know both sides are the same. And I cut it, and then I cut it as a fold. And now I've got 2 short sides and 2 long sides. And I don't have this evenly on. And it's going to bother me. And it shouldn't, because it's really not that important. It's close enough. Now, are we nice and smooth? Yeah, now we've lost this. Okay, that's okay. What I've done in the past is when it have a tendency to curl up, I'll put one of these on it. But this one is not looking like it's going to curl up. So I'm going to take a long one. I'm going to soak it so that it's really wet. This isn't a thing that you just moisten. I mean, you don't leave it in, but you can get it completely wet. You want to be square to the picture, not square to the board. This picture is not quite on it. And the reason I made a frame on this is because I want all of the photo in. If you're just working with a piece of, regular poster board or something, you don't need to do that. You just eye it. The other thing I like to do is have it, have it first one and then overlap and then overlap and then overlap. And then that's it. So here we go. Overlapped. And again, no bubbles. You don't want bubbles in your tape. You don't want bubbles on your picture or your paper. And then the top one. Square to the paper, not square to the board. Don't need that scissors. And the last one. There we go. So I think I can move this one without spilling it. Get it out of there. I spilled it a little bit. And what I usually do is I was going to fold the towel up, but I realized I have a computer on. I blot it. So that the worst of the wet is off. That's pretty good. That's pretty dry. You can see the difference here. Here where I didn't blot it, where it's more shiny. I'll blot it now. So now we have a very wet piece of paper that is adhering itself to this board with the tape. And I used to let it dry and then put on watercolor ground, but I've discovered you don't really have to do that. So I am using Daniel Smith's clear watercolor ground. And I like to do a couple of thin coats rather than one thick coat because I find it easier to control. Not a lot of water. It's probably a third the amount of water as ground, maybe not even. So now we have watercolor ground. I think it could be a little thinner. So this is sort of, in the jar, it's sort of the consistency of Elmer's glue. This is sort of the consistency of heavy cream. And so now I paint this whole thing. Yeah, this is still too thick. So I'm adding water. I'm adding water our usual way by using the brush. And I go over the tape. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. I like to go all the same way, and then the second coat, I'll go the other way. In other words, if I start out horizontal, then I'll go vertical, or vice versa. And what this does is well, when you're using a photograph, one thing it does is keeps you from pulling off the photograph with the watercolor. But it also helps you since this is not treated watercolor paper, even though it's stretched, it's going to be more likely to fall apart under your brush. And this protects it. And the nice thing is it works just like watercolor. So I did a thing and I decided I didn't want to stretch do another one and stretch the whole paper. And I really knew I didn't want to keep the one I had. So I said, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'll destroy the paper and I'll have to do the stretching again, which is me being lazy, the only thing I'm trying to avoid. So I sprayed it and then I wiped it. I didn't wipe it, I blotted it. And it seemed like the watercolor came up very nicely. And so I did it again. And then I even scrubbed it a little bit to be sure that I got all the color out. And it worked. So now this has to dry. See, by using the top, I can just put the top back on. But of course, that's how I get a disgusting edge, isn't it? Oh, there we go. And then this does have to dry for a couple of hours. Now, I've done this in the morning before class and had paper ready for class. So it doesn't need a gazillion hours, but it maybe does mean, 2 or 3. But that's it. That's how you stretch paper. That's how you make non-watercolor paper suitable for watercolor. That's it. Bye-bye.